And now you are welcome back to Arise America. Good to have you join us, Dr. Marek, and the lovely evening to you. We're talking about the issue with Trump, putting a call to Putin tomorrow. And I asked the question, should we be positive or look forward to that call tomorrow between the U.S. president and the Russian president?
This is an absolutely crucial telephone call, because the Russian-Ukrainian talks are going nowhere, really, without President Donald Trump's input, as he himself stated. So the question is, what can he say? What can he offer? What does he want? Well, he wants an end to the war. That is quite clear. His vision of the world is one of a business world, making deals, making money. And therefore, this is what he wants. The question is whether Russia will agree to this vision on the basis that it is sufficiently beneficial for them. And here it is a question of precisely what Donald Trump will be offering. The offer he makes is on two bases: A, that there'll be subsequent business with Russia and America, and B, precisely what territory Russia gets to keep, if any. However, he has also stated that if Russia does not do that, he's open to implementing further, far more severe sanctions. So the real question is, will Russia, faced by some sanctions or by the prospects of a reasonable peace, agree, or will President Putin carry on fighting? So when you say whether we should be positive, yes, we should be. However, the real question is, can actually the offer made by President Donald Trump succeed? And unfortunately, that's only half the story, because President Zelensky has to accept the offer that is in President Donald Trump's mind. And he has made it quite clear, not only does he not want to cede any Ukrainian territory de jure, ever, but on top of that, he doesn't want to cede it de facto. And in fact, wants President Putin to be tried as a war criminal. So the situation is difficult. We can be positive in the sense of hoping something will happen, but it is very hard to see right now a way out of this.
But do you think that, putting far, sanctions on, Russia would make, Putin to, concede to all of the talks that we are hoping for? Plus, I'd like for you to answer that alongside, Trump's hopes that this whole conversation would, amount to something, knowing or bearing in mind that he had said before now that if the EU doesn't tackle this head on, to ensure that something is done with regards to the war in Russia and Ukraine, then he would step aside.
Yes. First of all, the point here is that the possibility of bringing Russia to its knees by means of sanctions is not actually a realistic one. Certainly you can hurt Russia by sanctions, but then again, the Russians have been hurt before, far more, by invasions, and still come out on top. What I said at the very first day of the war still holds. Ukraine needs arms, the sanctions are next to useless, and the war may escalate into World War III, as I predicted in my books. But whether President Trump can succeed or not, as you said, there is a further possibility. He may well walk away from all this, as he has, in fact, so to speak, done before. So on this telephone call, there's riding a great deal, and it really does depend, as I've stated, on what he's prepared to offer President Putin. And that is unclear. Certainly, he has suggested that he's willing to see Ukrainian territory ceded to Russia, but as I stated before, President Zelensky then has to come aboard on that issue. So it is hard to see how President Donald Trump will succeed. I don't believe he's going to walk away from it straight away if President Putin is remotely conciliatory or remotely open to talks. But if President Putin draws the line, does not want to budge, then I think President Trump may well walk away from this.
Now, how important is a call between the EU leaders to Trump just before he makes the call to Putin?
I'm afraid Europe is not really very important. Unfortunately, Europe was, of course, once very important, but it isn't anymore. You see, without President Donald Trump, for all the words, harsh words even stated by Europe, Russia has carried on doing precisely what she wants. And for all the threats of sanctions or sanctions put on and everything, Russia carries on. Europe simply is unimportant in all this. Sure, if there was peace, there'd be business with Europe, but that is, in fact, in itself secondary to USA. So both militarily, politically, diplomatically, and economically, Europe is so much in the second league that I'm afraid the answer is it's unimportant, really. It all hinges on President Donald Trump and USA.
Right. And also, Trump had said he would like a situation where he could meet with Putin face to face because he believes that a lot would change and decisions, would be made if he meets with the, Russian president. But that did not happen in Turkey, even though Trump looked forward to it. Now, also, when Putin says he'd like to eliminate Ukraine's cause of conflict, what do you think he's referencing? The U.S. military base or Europe? What exactly?
Yeah, to the first one, Putin actually never stated he would turn up at these talks. He said there should be direct talks, and indeed there are. He never said that he would be there personally. This is actually part of the PR campaign of Ukraine and Europe to try and show that Putin is running away or scared or whatever. Putin and the Russians play a long game. No talks are fast. So whether President Donald Trump meeting President Putin in Moscow would solve something straight away is also dubious because the Russians don't work that way. They never have. The SALT talks took years. Far more interesting is the question of what Russia means by this call, as you rightly pointed out. Now, first and foremost, there are three aspects. The first is Russia actually doesn't want Ukraine to exist at all. They would like to conquer it. However, that is out of the question at present. So number one is what are the second and third lines of, if you like. One of them is that some territory inhabited by Russians, which is Donetsk and so on, and Crimea, as well as a land bridge to Crimea, would seem to be President Putin's territorial demands, although he has gone for all four regions, which actually exceed this, and it hasn't, in fact, managed to conquer these. But secondly, he wants Ukraine neutralized, so there are no bases of any sort, either European or American, and Ukraine is not part of NATO. And here the central problem is, as Russia knows full well, is the moment there's peace, there's going to be troops there from the West, whatever the agreement. And therefore, as a result, the fact of the matter is he cannot control a sovereign nation without going to war with it and trying to force the issue. And any sort of treaty he wants is unlikely, in fact, to transpire along those lines, because it's hard to see how he can tell Ukraine precisely what to do with Europeans. The only way he could do that is by reinvading. Well, that would be very difficult, to be honest. So therefore, from this point of view, those core issues are unlikely to be addressed in the way that Russia wants.
Now let's bring in, the Pope. The Pope is to meet with Zelensky, or has maybe indeed met with him. Now, how much influence does the Pope have on these types of issues? I know the Pope, the UN, the call for peace and all of that, but how important is that meeting with Zelensky?
Well, it's not without importance. Let's look at the bright side. The Pope is come off the fence compared to his predecessor and seems to be quite openly supporting Ukraine, which is good news. Secondly, he is made it quite clear he doesn't like wars, which is good news. And I'm afraid that, and of course, he has some influence amongst Catholics, Poland being the very nation right next to Ukraine, a very important nation in terms of supplying Ukraine with arms and political support. So all this is very important, up to date. But it's not all that important because, to be quite honest, like NATO, the Pope is simply no longer the figure he was. In NATO's case, just a few years ago, it was very, very important. Now it's been sidelined. The Pope hasn't been the crucial figure politically and so on now for decades, if not centuries. And therefore, that is irrelevant. Moreover, as far as Russia is concerned, it's just one more anti-Russian, if you like, leader. So therefore, he's unlikely to have any impact there. But it does add to President Zelensky's PR campaign. There is, however, one minor point to note. Ukraine basically is an Orthodox nation, as is Russia. So the Pope's influence is minimal, except for the Catholics in Ukraine, which are, on the whole, or many of them, are Poles who, as they put it, the frontier move. They've always been there. And that has some impact, of course. And again, in short, some help for Ukraine, but not of fundamental importance.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz, for joining us from London to discuss the top stories today. Now.